Hi everyone, I'm Kevin Nelson. Here's a look at what's going on this week in the news. We begin with news from the Vatican. At the end of his weekly general audience, Pope Francis highlighted the February 8th World Day of Prayer and Awareness against human trafficking. In an appeal, the Pope invited everyone to join forces to prevent trafficking, which he called a shameful scourge, and guarantee protection and assistance to victims. The World Day of Prayer falls each year on February 8th, the feast day of Saint Josephine Bakhita, who was kidnapped as a child and sold into slavery in Sudan and Italy. Once freed, she became a nun and served the poor and suffering. Also at the end of the audience, the Pope brought attention to the unified delegation and team for North and South Korea at this year's Olympic Games. The Pope said this move builds hope for a world in which conflicts are resolved peacefully with dialogue and mutual respect, just as sports teach people to do. The Pope offered his prayers and greetings to all those gathered for the 23rd Winter Olympic Games taking place from February 9th through the 25th in Pyeongchang, South Korea. In news from Rome, in a letter to an Italian journalist, retired Pope Benedict XVI wrote that he was on a pilgrimage toward home. The letter comes on the 5th anniversary of the Pope Emeritus's announcement of his retirement.
Since his resignation exactly 5 years ago, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI has remained almost completely out of the public eye. However, Ratzinger has chosen to shed a bit more light on both his state of mind and being in a new letter to an Italian newspaper. The 9-line message arrived at Rome-based Il Corriere della Sera on Tuesday morning, complete with Benedict's fragile signature. The Pope Emeritus also expresses his gratitude to the newspaper and its readership for their concern for his well-being since his resignation. In the letter's brief contents, Ratzinger refers to a slow decline of physical forces and admits to being on an inward pilgrimage to home. Later, he assures it's a blessing to be surrounded in this occasionally difficult final stretch by a love and kindness I never could have imagined. Sunday, February 11th will mark the 5th anniversary of the announcement of Benedict's resignation.
The retired Pope has been living in a monastery in the Vatican Gardens for the past 5 years, reading, praying, listening to music, and welcoming visitors. In news now from around the world, 2 Mexican priests were gunned down as they returned from Candlemas celebrations early February 5th in a section of Mexico rife with drug cartel violence and increasingly lethal for the clergy. The priests were riding in Guerrero State when an armed group blocked the priest's vehicle and opened fire. The priests were traveling with 4 other passengers, all of whom were injured. According to the Catholic Multimedia Center, 21 priests have been murdered since December of 2012, with the cases overwhelmingly remaining unpunished. In Guerrero State alone, at least 6 priests have been killed since 2009. In 2017, Mexico suffered its most murderous year since records started being kept in 1997. Just in Guerrero State, there were 2,138 homicides in 2017. More news from the Vatican. As Lent approaches, Pope Francis is getting Catholics to prepare for their journey by releasing a message highlighting ways in which the faithful can prevent focusing on themselves. Rome Report says more on the Pope's Lenten message.
Pope Francis has proposed fighting the plague of cold hearts throughout Lent, which begins February 14th. The Vatican has presented the message the Pope wrote for the occasion, in which he issues a warning. The 21st century Catholic must beware of vanity and being seduced by transient things that do not lead to happiness.
This is the content of the Pope's message. Pay attention to the obstacles that block our response to the call, to the invitation to love.
Throughout the 40 days the Church dedicates to preparing for Holy Week, Christians usually participate more intensely in prayer, almsgiving, and fasting. The Pope has suggested rediscovering these cornerstones of Christianity because they help prevent this disease, closing oneself in a selfish way. Pope Francis says this attitude ends up rejecting various people that some view as obstacles, from unborn children to the foreigner neighbor who does not meet predisposed expectations. In the message, the Pope also mentioned the campaign 24 Hours for the Lord on March 9th and 10th. It's an initiative which reinforces another central point of this liturgical time: confession.
And finally in the news, in a 14-minute speech delivered at the National Prayer Breakfast, President Donald Trump held up as American heroes people from many walks of life who strive to help others as part of their daily routines and in emergencies. He said they are signs of God's grace. The president cited American servicemen and women, police officers, teachers, and parents as signs of inspiration. The president said all you have to do is open your eyes and look around and see God's hand in the courage of our fellow citizens. The president singled out 9-year-old Sophia Maria Campa Peters from Brownfield, Texas, who learned from doctors that she would not be able to walk because of multiple strokes. As a result of that diagnosis, Sophia sought out prayers. Her goal was 10,000 prayers, but she surpassed that goal and even got the president and members of his administration to ask God to intervene for her health. The president, in calling her a hero, said she is well now, walking very well. The National Prayer Breakfast has taken place every year since 1953. Every U.S. president since Dwight D. Eisenhower has participated in that event. Well, that is all the information we have for you this time. I'm Kevin Nelson. Don't forget, you can keep up to date on Catholic news throughout the week with Catholic Newsbreak right here on the Catholic TV network.